Welcome to Work is Good, a CSM podcast. My name is Landon and I host the show with my dad, Chris Buteau, who's the owner and president at CSM. This conversation today breaks down a few main takeaways that we had from the book Atomic Habits. We found the book had some really great insight on why habits specifically are the key to accomplishing your goals and the things you want to. And it also had some really good insights on how to build those habits, just practical advice. So those were a few takeaways from today's conversation for you. So I hope you enjoy this week's conversation. The reason this book is top of mind is because Dad recommended it for the CSM employees, the CSM loan originators, all two of us, not including Dad, Bridget and I. And so I've been reading through it, and I know you've read through it, and we've touched on discipline before, and that's obviously related to building habits. But I just wanted to talk about this book specifically. I know it's a fairly well-known book, and it has some good stuff in there. So I'll let you kind of intro the book itself and why you recommended it to us.
Yeah, you bet. The reason I recommended it is because it speaks to a truth of human nature that is extremely powerful in creating the sort of outcomes that you want to achieve in life, and it can this can apply across. It can relate to your physical health, your weight. It can relate to sort of attitudes you want to develop. It can relate to business practices, which is of course why I recommend it for CSM sales employees. But the basic premise of the book is that it's basically twofold. One is that habits themselves are powerful indicators of change, powerful tools to achieve outcomes that you want to achieve. The way that you change your life is by changing your habits. You can look at a certain outcome, you can work toward that outcome, but ultimately it's not sustainable unless you change the habits that are necessary to produce that outcome. And so first of all, one of the premises of that book is habits are essential in order to produce consistent outcomes. And the other premise of that book is habits are changeable. Habits are within our control to develop. And that goes for positive habits. We identify habits that we want to create. And it also goes for eliminating negative habits, and so that was the basic premise. The reason I recommended it for CSM is because, I know in my own life, prospecting is something that's very difficult. I've been in the business long enough that I can be a little bit lazy, and enough business typically will come in that I can get by, and I can avoid doing some things that are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But if I would instead develop habits that lean into that discomfort, it really is true that over time those things just become unconscious and easy and produce the sort of outcomes that are really enjoyable and desirable.
Yeah. So is it accurate to summarize your first premise there, just in terms of the reasons you recommended it, the two theses of the book, I guess, that you mentioned, regarding the value and the fact that they're changeable. Basically, you're saying habits, one, are important, essential for the life you want to live, and two, they're in your control.
Yes. And
so here's a book on, therefore, how to manage them. Okay, great. So yeah, we were talking a little bit before about where we want to focus this conversation, and as I'm thinking about it now as it relates to what you just said, I think it is largely in the second thesis there, that they're changeable, which is a lot of the focus of the book.
Right.
It's just an intro, is that they're important. It's definitely a key part of the book there, but really a lot of the content focuses on how to control them, how to form them.
Right.
And there were kind of three key principles that we took away from the book that we wanted to focus on here. One is that if you want to form a habit, make it easy. and we'll get into kind of what that means in two different senses. And two, a helpful practical way to form a habit is to stack on other cues that are already part of your life. And three is the importance of consistency. So as far as the first one, to make it easy, we talked about two different senses that Clear kind of focused on in the book. The first was in terms of starting the habit. Just make it something that is startable. You don't have to start with the version of the habit that you want it to be down the road.
Right.
And so in that sense, it kind of seems like you have to, if you want to start a new habit, you have to just swallow the pill and start doing what you want to do. But he gets at some problems with that. Do you want to touch on that at all?
Yeah, you bet. And interestingly, today I stumbled upon an old business card of mine from probably back in 2013, where I worked with a manager who shared a book with us called The Compound Effect. And it had some of the similar themes there. And the idea was, that small changes over time compound. And kind of goes to the idea that you're talking about, is that, if you look at a habit and say, I want to get in the habit of running 3 miles a day, and I'm 100 pounds overweight today, and I can barely walk to the mailbox and back, that's a very daunting challenge. And so if I'm thinking of how do I get from here to there, that's a big gulf that I have to get across. But the idea of the compound effect, and similar with James Clear's idea of, one of the laws of habit forming is make it easy, right? Make it easy. And one of the ways in which you do that is start very, very small. And the example in this, in this book, The Compound Effect, and Clear uses similar examples, is, there was a lady who was extremely overweight, and her coach recommended, that she start running on a consistent basis, and fairly long objectives, like maybe 3 miles a day. But he had her start and say, look, I know you can't do this now. Right. I know it seems impossible. Yeah. Just go to the trash can and back. Just walk to the trash can and back. Do that for a week, and gradually increasing that over time. And I think that's the idea that you're pointing at, is that if you just start small, doing something small, that's something that our minds don't struggle with, that our bodies don't rebel against, that we can do. And if we simply do that and add a little bit to that, we get kind of the idea of getting 1% better every day. It amounts to a substantial change over time. And
for some reason, so I'd heard you mention that example before and read it. The example you mentioned earlier also kind of struck home for me, that I think Clear uses, the gym example, which obviously not all of them have to be weight and exercise related.
Right. They're good illustrations.
Yeah, exactly. And the example here was that he had a friend who wanted to start going to the gym, lifting weights, right? And he thought that that just wasn't something appealing to him. You don't want to spend an hour at a gym a day lifting weights. So he forced himself to start going, and forced himself to start leaving 5 minutes later every day, or once a week, or however often he was going. And then kind of over time, as he built the habit of going, then it was kind of like, well, I might as well add something while I'm here, and I'm comfortable with that because I'm already here.
Right.
So start with a more manageable form, and then add to it over time, I think was helpful. But what was the other sense that you were talking about in terms of making your habit easy?
Well, I think you're referring to the fact that it becomes... over time. Yeah, repetition. The idea of repetition. Ultimately, Clear points out the fact that, your conscious brain is really a bottleneck. That the more you have to think about something to do something, the harder that is to do, right? And the more competition you have for that part of your brain to actually accomplish those sorts of things. And so if you do something repetitively over time, once it becomes a habit, it really does become easy in a sense, because people might think that, wow, if I want to get up at, and I kind of hate to use myself, as an example all the time, but that's all I have to draw from, right?
Yeah, helpful example.
My alarm goes off at 4:19 in the morning, and I know there was a point in time when to think of that would have seemed really daunting, and now it is just automatic, and I go ride the bike for an hour. I go ride the bike for an hour, and it is just automatic. It is easy in the sense that I just don't have to think about it, whereas I know that wasn't the case when I first got started out. And so I do think that there's those two components of it. One is just start to habituate something in an easy form so that you'll do it. You don't have to fight that dread. Just do it in an easier form, and then once it becomes habituated, just gradually increase it. And over time you'll find that, wow, I'm doing this really unconsciously.
The more difficult form becomes easier.
It's just not that. It's not that hard.
Right.
Those things, you just start doing them, and your brain is trained like a physical muscle. Your brain does adapt to repetition. And it has greater capacity to perform whatever action you're doing as you repeat that more often.
Yeah. And I think that's the second point you touched on there is very related to the consistency element, which was the second talking point that we wanted to touch on. In that, Clear brings up the importance of identifying some consistent elements to your habit. So, he talks about writing as an example. If you want to start writing, don't just say you're going to start writing for 15 minutes each day. Instead, identify the place you're going to do it and the time you're going to do it, and then to your point before, the conscious brain is kind of a bottleneck, and so if you know, okay, I want to write for 15 minutes each day, and then you have a block of 15 minutes, and then you're like, oh, I could use this. I know I need to do my habit. I need to do my writing, but I have something else going on. Should I do this or that? Then it's a challenge, and you're unsure. But if you have a specific time and place dedicated to it, then there's no decision making to the process.
Right.
It just is what it is.
Yeah.
And then choosing to do it isn't so much a choice, or choosing where and when, and you're eliminating the obstacles basically by adding consistency. Anything to add there?
No, I think you've got that. I mean, he talks, I guess, he talks about, the environment is super important to establishing new habits, and that I would say is kind of a subset of that. It's just, stipulating a place and time, and just making it easier then for those to be cues to do the thing that you're trying to become, habit, to make a habit of.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing, the third point we wanted to bring up from the book was just the idea of habit stacking and cues. Do you want to take that one away?
Yeah. So the other thing he talked about, and this has to do with, the book talks about both identifying and forming good habits, but also how to get rid of bad habits. And habit stacking has most to do with forming new habits, but basically, what he says is, first of all, in order to consciously form a habit, you have to know thyself, know what habits you're currently engaged in. So you first kind of start out with just a habit inventory, and it can be things as mundane as brushing your teeth, or you just kind of go through a whole list of what are your current habits. And it can be the very mundane things, because those can become central to a strategy that he calls habit stacking, basically where you start to go, okay, here are all the things I'm currently doing. Now, here's what I want to achieve. Which of those habits could I match this with? And generally, you're looking for matches in terms of frequency, and context. One of the bad examples, he says, if you want to increase your time of meditation, the time to do that is not when all the kids come down for breakfast, in the morning, and they're all crazy and running around and there's lots of noise. That's not the habit of, when you're feeding your kids breakfast, that habit that you do every day. that's not the time to try and do meditation, right? That's a poor match
Right.
of a habit in that case, because they're just mutually
They don't fit
inconsistent with
together.
one another.
Yeah.
They don't fit. But on a more positive example, if you want to become more grateful, say that's a habit you want to engage in, is just be more self-consciously grateful, more grateful in your thoughts, and maybe even unconsciously grateful all the time. You want to form the habit of just being grateful for the moment, for things. And he said, one of the ways you can do that is if every day, you drink coffee in the morning, you come down the first thing in the morning, you make yourself a cup of coffee, you could stack or match the habit of saying, okay, every time I get a cup of coffee, I'm going to say 3 things I'm grateful for. I'm going to self-consciously think about 3 things that I'm grateful for. So now you've taken a habit that you already do, that's automatic, that you're going to do every day, and then you've said, okay, I'm going to bolt on to that, this other activity, so that it's a cue. This habit, then this activity becomes a cue for this thing that I want to create. And he goes into various details on that, but basically that's the idea behind habit stacking is to match the habit you want to create with something you already do.
And did you mention the frequency at all that he touched on, which is kind of intuitive, but basically you didn't hit on that, did you? The matching frequency.
Yeah, well, I think I referenced it, but I didn't illustrate it. Do you remember any of the illustrations specifically?
I don't remember his examples, but basically if there's something that you want, if you're trying to habit stack and there's something that you want to do 5 times a week, don't attach it to a habit that you do once a week,
right?
Or vice versa, which is a little intuitive, but
like an idea. Let me just give you let's give you an idea. Let's say let's take this gratitude example. You wanted to become more grateful, but your habit that you wanted to perform was to pause 5 times each day and be grateful. Well, matching that to the habit of brushing your teeth probably wouldn't work, right? Because you typically brush your teeth twice a day. You brush your teeth once in the morning, once in the evening. And so those 2 habits aren't necessarily going to be good stacking candidates because they don't line up, in terms of timing. You want something that has the frequency of the habit you're trying to create with an existing habit.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks, Dad. Yeah, I think those are 3 helpful things for me that I've been thinking about, and just 3 things that stood out. Make it easy, make it consistent, and then when you're trying to form a new habit, stack it on others. Use those as cues. So super helpful. Good book overall, and really enjoyed it.
Yeah. I think the kind of the last thing I would say on one of the kind of the over-framing sort of concepts that he had in there is the ideas of habits. A good way to think about habits is systems over goals. Identity over outcomes. Because if you have a goal, goals are great, and many hugely successful, just virtually all hugely successful people have a habit of setting goals.
Right.
But a goal is something that has a definite end and it's done. Whereas a habit is a process that creates the outcomes that are the object of those goals. And so a habit focuses on systems, and you kind of become what your habits are. And so those goals become much easier to achieve when you focus on those. And the idea of identity versus outcomes, again, it's kind of a similar thing, is habits, if they become your identity, this is the type of person I am. I do this every day. It's not focusing on the outcome, although the outcomes are the desirable reasons that you do this.
Right.
But you're focusing on becoming the type of person who does this all the time. And I think if you think about it in those things, you can kind of easily start to see both the benefit of it and some of the psychology behind how to kind of rewire your thinking and start to get into those good habits.
In one sense, it kind of comes across sometimes as just like, self-help garbage of, think I am this person, and then you will.
Right.
But like you've said, there is something to, instead of, I wish I could get up earlier. I wish I want to have more time during the day. I want to wake up by this time 3 days a week. I want to work out 3 days a week. If you take that first step and then start thinking as someone and of yourself as someone who works out or as someone who gets up early, then it does result in a mindset shift. That's obviously leads to new actions, desirable actions. So I think that's helpful. Cool. Well, thanks, Dad. Good conversation.
Yeah, thank you.